Welcome to this module on mineral nutrition and reproductive performance. In this module, we'll be looking at how we can optimize reproductive performance through good mineral nutrition. The first portion of this module will be handled by Dr. Mike Hutchins, talking about mineral nutrition and its influence on reproductive performance. I'll then follow up with some specifics about our SQM trace mineral line and its influence on reproductive performance.
Well, certainly this topic, minerals and reproduction, is important, and we're going to give you a quick update on some of the nuances and opportunities looking at this phase of the feeding program. Let's begin by talking about what I call micronutrients, and minerals and vitamins and additives would fall into that. We call them micronutrients because we normally are adding these in small amounts, grams of calcium, milligrams of zinc, for example. So it's not like 50 pounds of dry matter or 4 kilograms of protein. Normally, they are not routinely measured in rations and labs, and one of the reasons, of course, is our NIR units cannot see them because they have no carbon in them. So therefore, we don't see them tested like we do with NDF and ADF. Another aspect is that usually these are small cost items in the ration. Typically 30, 40 cents a day will get your mineral programs delivered to your dairy cattle. And of course, immediately there's no response. In other words, if I add zinc tomorrow, milk production will not go up 2 pounds in 3 or 4 days. So certainly it is not quite as dynamic of a nutrient as you would with energy or protein. When we look at mineral factors, some of the minerals are related to milk production. For example, you'll see listed there calcium, phosphorus, and potassium. Other minerals are related to gestation. Selenium and phosphorus and manganese would play into that, and you'll see a few more a bit later. Certainly, the ration, the benefit-to-cost ratio. In other words, if I'm going to buy a certain mineral program and it costs me 10 cents, I expect to get at least 20 cents of value back on that. And finally, certain minerals are related to stages of lactation. For example, the transition cow, certainly you'd see some of our trace minerals having a much bigger role there than they will in, say, the lactating cow. We look at the three principles, I call them the ABC factors. When we look at minerals, availability, in other words, just because I feed calcium doesn't mean the cow absorbs that calcium. It could be tied up as an oxalate, for example. There could be interactions. For example, copper and moly have interactions. Another aspect is balance, and especially in our trace minerals. Sometimes if you overfeed one trace mineral, it biologically reduces the absorption of the other trace mineral in the program. And of always, we are in the dairy industry, and its cost, and certainly what are the economics of making these changes. A fun slide to look at, and this one has trace minerals on it because it really is a big driver, was one that was put together a couple of years ago in which we looked at how do we know what kind of responses we're going to see. And we see over on the left side, the green arrow, that's where you want to be. In my view, if the price of milk is $10 or $20 or $30, for example, if you're in Canada, then obviously we want to be in the green area because then we start going into the orange, which is the caution area. And you can see that things start happening. And this research group pulled this together. It's not my PowerPoint, shows that the immune system, and we'll talk more about that in another module another time, and enzyme functions can be affected. This is very difficult to see, though, on the dairy farm. Then we start seeing some things that can affect performance, growth, and fertility. And then finally, you'll see we don't get optimal growth, but we get suboptimal growth and a reduction in fertility. And then eventually you get into clinical signs. In other words, there are very classic symptoms of zinc deficiencies, copper deficiencies. Trust me, we don't want to be there because obviously these animals are in big trouble. So that's another challenge, is sometimes the responses we're monitoring are not easy to see, especially with the trace minerals. Then I thought we should look at what are the big players. And this is my bias. Every nutritionist will be slightly different. In my view, what minerals really have impact on reproduction? Phosphorus, and you could also indirectly put calcium with that if you wish, zinc, copper, manganese, and selenium. And these will impact reproduction either directly, they may come through immune system response, the health of the uterine wall, the development of the fetus, or it may even have some effects on, for example, selenium in terms of retained placenta. But certainly, in my view, this would be the right answer if you're saying, well, what are the minerals we really want to be aware of when we're looking specifically at reproductive performance? You'll see a couple of PowerPoints coming now on our recommendations. I'm not going to walk you through all these numbers. These are the macro minerals. These are fed in terms of grams per day, usually expressed as percent of the ration dry matter. And I thought out of fun, we'd put up NRC 89, NRC 2001, which are guidelines the industry uses. And then you'll see U of I extension. And you see we will play and change these numbers around just a little bit. A little more aggressive on calcium, for example. A little bit more aggressive, especially heat stress, on potassium. A little more aggressive on sulfur because of its effects it may have on sulfur amino acids in hoof health. So certainly this would be one table. Each of you will have this table in your file and maybe slightly different. On the microminerals, the same format. Now you can see them listed over here. We have 7 of them listed. I'll not read those to you. Again, you can always print this table out if you want, or review it a bit later, or actually stop the module and look at it if you wish. And again, you can see the NRC requirement, the Illinois guidelines over here. And notice on the right side, we now put a max in. In other words, suddenly now some of these trace minerals, if you get them really high, they can have some biological effect either on the animal or in the blood levels or some performance in the animal. Delivering these trace minerals can be done usually through some type of a mineral package. Here you'll see this is the actual numbers I target. This is what I would add to the lactating and the dry cow ration. And again, these are milligrams per cow per day. So you can see I'd be adding 1,000 milligrams of zinc. Let's just remember that number a bit later because we'll talk a little bit about organic trace minerals here. Delivering this can be done by a number of different mixes. Companies have these premixes, or VTMs they sometimes call them. This is one we have at the U of I, and we feed this at a 1/10 pound per cow per day rate, both lactating and dry cows, and this will deliver those trace mineral numbers we saw in the previous slide. We also have our vitamins A, D, and E in there. So if you look at that, this will deliver 100,000 of A, 30,000 of D, and 1,000 of E. So again, you need to look at this tag and then max it up to the previous numbers to see how many milligrams your trace mineral package is going to deliver. We mentioned earlier that the relationship between minerals can be important, and these are just some of them that are important. You can see, for example, we have a zinc-copper ratio there. We know that one is important. There is a classic one, the copper moly or molybdenum at 6:1. So if moly starts increasing, if you're living in Ohio and the Washington State and some other areas in the U.S., moly can pop up in the feed. You can see, for example, the last one, nitrogen to sulfur. That's an amino acid synthesis in the rumen. So you can see these ratios have different functions in terms of antagonist, in terms of complementation, in terms of relationship to other nutrients. Another controversial topic is the methods. We are going to recommend force feeding our minerals to our dairy cattle. We think we know better what they need. Injectable trace minerals is another one. Here's just a quick example. One commercial product. You can see the levels and that is contained in a 5 millimeter injection, which is the recommended level by that company. You can see they give 3 shots a day. Now remember, if I inject this, I'm going to be injecting in about 200 milligrams of zinc. Remember, the requirement we had in the previous table was 1,000 milligrams per day. So again, you can see if you read down here, the concept is to try to top off what is already being recommended by the nutritionist or the feeding company out there at that stage of the game. It's not to replace or be the major mineral feeding program. Some of these are RX, which means are recommended by the veterinarian, and you can see the results if you look at our variable. Some of the journal articles show no response, some of the field studies show some positive, and I just listed one example as it relates to reproduction. Then let's look at another way of delivering minerals to our cows, and that, of course, would be organic minerals. Now, these are going to be force-fed, so certainly we're looking at different types. And you can see these are the various classifications that are registered with the feed industry, and most, if not all, organic trace minerals are going to fall into one of those 4 categories. But the key here, organic, simply tells you and I that this is somehow tied to a carbon structure. That could be an amino acid, that could be a protein complex, that could be a carbohydrate complex. It could even be a lipid product as far as that goes. But that's what differentiates them, for example, like from salt. Salt would be inorganic. That is sodium and chloride. Every feed company, every nutritionist, every extension worker have a little different philosophy. Generally, we are recommending organic trace minerals for the following reasons. Number one, I think we'll find, and we know the research says, better absorption. And especially when there is an antagonist. An antagonist could be a nutrient, that could be another mineral, could be something in the water, who knows what it is, but restricts the absorption of or utilization of that mineral, in this case a trace mineral. We think the form of the mineral is very important here because then it can get into important biological processes in the body, such as the immune function. And if I can enhance the immune function, then that obviously is going to improve reproductive performance, and certainly it can get to different pools in the body as well. So certainly we know there's also an associated cost with that. So certainly now we look at strategies, and my strategy would be to recommend with organic trace minerals is to provide 25 to 33% of the total supplemented zinc, copper, and manganese as an organic mineral source. Remember, we said zinc 1,000 milligrams, so we'd be supplementing 250, 300, 350, 400 milligrams of the zinc as organic. Then the other would come from zinc sulfate or zinc chloride or some or inorganic sources. That balances off response versus cost. You'll notice on selenium, we are recommending to add about 50% of the selenium as organic, 100% of the dry cows as organic selenium. I would target cows that the data is very clear, embryo transfer cow, both donor and recips, clear, better reproductive responses there. So basically, we would look at putting this into diets when we have cows that are open. So certainly early lactation would be a very logical place to be. Environmentally stressed cows, these would be cows under heat stress, cold stress, could be cows under some type of manure activity at this stage, or even disease stresses to try to help the immune system. So we are recommending definitely to put them into the far off, close up, and early lactation cow diets. Certainly in Illinois, usually that means all cows are getting them, and with a very modest increase in cost, that's a fairly easy recommendation to keep the organic trace minerals in the entire lactating diet. So my take-home messages would be, when we look at mineral programs, number one, the way to feed trace minerals is a force feeding program. I think you're going to look at feeding it in terms of the actual amounts rather than percentages or parts per million, so grams or milligrams per day. I think number two is strategically consider where you want to put your organic trace mineral program based on research results and needs of those dairy cattle. And then finally, be aware of interactions, relationships, and interfering compounds that may exist out there on dairy farms.